The call came in at 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was reconciling a client's quarterly numbers and half listening to the dishwasher run in the next room. Is this Dana Whitfield? I'm calling from Ibarra Forensic Accounting. I'm the auditor retained in the matter of Whitfield Restoration and Design. I remember setting my pen down very carefully, the way you do when your hands have already figured out something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I'm sorry. Is this about my brother's company? It is. I'm calling because your name appears as an active personal guarantor on a business line of credit taken out 14 months ago. $340,000. A pause, papers shifting somewhere on her end. I wanted to confirm some details with you directly before I include this in my report. For a second, I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do with a sentence like that. There's been a mistake, I said. I signed a loan for Cole 6 years ago. It was paid off. I was released from that guarantee when he refinanced. I have the original 2020 agreement here, and you're right. That one shows a release date. Another pause longer this time, the kind auditors use on purpose. This is a different document. Dated 14 months ago. Your signature's on it. I hadn't signed anything for my brother in over a year. I hadn't signed anything with his company's name on it since the day I drove to the bank with him, 29 years old and stupidly proud of him, and put my name on a loan because he was my little brother and he needed someone to believe in him. Send it to me, I said. Whatever you have. Send it to me right now. She did. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my son's basketball shoes still by the back door where he'd kicked them off that morning, and I looked at a signature that was mine and wasn't mine, on a document I had never seen, attached to a debt large enough to take my house. I want to be honest about something before I go further, because this story only makes sense if I am. 3 weeks before that phone call, Cole had asked me for money. Not a small amount, $150,000, to cover payroll he'd already missed twice, to keep the doors open on a company that I had quietly watched make one reckless decision after another for 2 years. I said no. I said it clearly, and I said it once, and I have replayed that conversation so many times since that I could recite it word for word. I told him no because I'd found out, almost by accident, that he'd taken bonus draws for himself the same month he'd stopped paying 2 of his subcontractors. I told him no because my son starts college applications this fall and my husband and I don't have money we can afford to lose. I told him no because I had already given him something once. My name, my trust, my signature, and I believed, foolishly, that giving it once was enough. He didn't yell. That's the part that still gets me. He just went quiet on the phone and said, "Okay, I understand," in a voice that didn't sound like understanding at all. I didn't hear from him again after that. Not one call. Not for 3 weeks. Now I was sitting here staring at a signature that looked exactly like mine, dated to a period when I had no idea he was still using my name for anything. If you're new here, I tell true first-person stories about the moments that quietly reshape a family. Hit subscribe, because this one is going somewhere I didn't see coming either. I called Cole. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. So I did the only thing that made sense to a person who spends her days reading financial statements for a living. I opened a blank document, and I started writing down every date I could remember. Because somewhere in those 14 months, my brother had made a decision about who I was without asking me. And I intended to find out exactly how far back it went. To understand why this hit me the way it did, you have to understand what Cole and I were to each other before any of this. I'm 3 years older. Our dad left when Cole was 8, and our mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, which meant that a lot of the raising of Cole fell to me. Packing his lunches, checking his homework, sitting in the school office when he got in fights defending kids who didn't even like him much. He was that kind of boy. Reckless with his own safety, protective of everyone else's. When he told me at 23 that he wanted to start a renovation company, our mother said it was too risky. I was the one who sat with him at my kitchen table. A different table, a different life, but the same instinct, and helped him build a business plan. When the bank wanted a personal guarantor because his credit was thin and his experience was thinner, I didn't hesitate. I had a stable job, decent credit, and a brother who used to give me his dessert when we were kids because he said I worked harder than he did. That's the version of Cole I carried with me for years. Generous. A little reckless. Mine to protect. The company did well for a while. He hired good people. He built a reputation in Columbus for doing quality work on old houses, the kind other contractors wouldn't touch. I was proud of him in the specific way you're proud of someone you helped build something. The cracks started about 2 years ago, though I didn't call them cracks at the time. He expanded too fast, took on a second crew, leased a bigger warehouse, bought equipment he didn't need yet. I know this because he told me himself over dinner, laughing about it in that self-deprecating way he has. I got ahead of myself, he said. It's fine. It'll even out. It didn't even out. Over the following year, I started hearing things. Not from Cole, but from our mother, who has never once in her life kept anything to herself. A subcontractor had called the house looking for him. A supplier had put him on a cash-only basis. Barbara relayed all of this to me the way she relays everything, half worried and half defensive of him, like reporting a fever she didn't want me to diagnose as anything serious. I asked Cole about it directly once at Ethan's birthday party in June. He waved it off. Growing pains, he said. Every business goes through it. I wanted to believe him. That's the truth I have to sit with now. I wanted to believe him so badly that I let a version of my brother exist in my head that had stopped being accurate a long time before I noticed. Then, in July, I found the pay stub. Not intentionally. Barbara had asked me to help her sort through some old paperwork at her house. She still keeps physical files for everything, insists on it, and Cole's name came up because he'd left a folder of business documents there months earlier and never picked it up. I wasn't snooping. I was being a good daughter. 3 hole punching bank statements into a binder for a woman who doesn't trust computers. That's when I saw it. A payroll summary, 7 months old, showing a $22,000 bonus disbursement to Cole Whitfield, owner. Dated the same week, I checked twice, then a third time, because I didn't want it to be true, that 2 subcontractor invoices for the Sycamore Street project had gone unpaid past 90 days. I didn't say anything to Barbara. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. I confronted him 2 days later. Not with anger, at first, with the kind of careful, measured question you ask someone you're trying to give an exit ramp to. Cole, I need to understand something. You took a bonus while people were waiting on payment for work they already did. He didn't deny it. He said the bonus was owed to him under the operating agreement, that the timing was a coincidence, that I didn't understand how cash flow worked in construction. He said it with the particular confidence of someone who has decided, somewhere along the way, that being right about the technicalities excuses everything else. I remember thinking, watching him say it, this is not the boy who gave me his dessert. 3 weeks later, he asked me for $150,000. And 3 weeks after that, an auditor was reading me the terms of a $340,000 loan I had never agreed to guarantee. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the document Renata Ibarra had sent me, reading it over and over the way you reread a sentence that doesn't change no matter how many times you look at it. The signature was close. Close enough that at first glance, even I second-guessed myself. But I've signed my name tens of thousands of times in my career, on tax returns, engagement letters, audit work papers. I know my own hand the way I know my own face. The loop on the D was too round. I don't loop it like that. I make it sharp, almost a straight line down before I curve back up. Whoever signed this had seen my signature enough times to get close, but not enough times to get it exactly right. That told me something important, though it took me until almost 2 a.m. to understand what. This wasn't a stranger forging a document. This was someone who'd watched me sign things before, someone with access to old paperwork, someone who knew what my signature was supposed to look like. Mark found me still at the table when he came down for water around midnight. He read over my shoulder for a minute, quiet, and then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you think Cole did this himself, or do you think someone did it for him? I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say not Cole, never Cole, he wouldn't. The same sentence I'd been saying to myself for 2 years about smaller things. But I was done saying that sentence. The next morning, I called Renata Ibarra back before I'd even had coffee. I need to see everything, I told her. Every document with my name on it, every date, every disbursement tied to that line of credit. She was quiet for a second, then said something that stuck with me. You understand I work for the creditor group in this matter, not for you. But since your name is on the guarantee, you're entitled to the documentation. I can send what I have. What she sent took me most of the day to get through, and by the time I did, my hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd gone past that, into the kind of stillness I get when I'm building a case, which is a professional habit I didn't know I'd need for my own family. The line of credit had been opened 14 months earlier at a regional bank Cole's company hadn't used before. 14 months earlier was 2 months before I confronted him about the bonus. Which meant this wasn't a decision he'd made out of desperation after I said no to the personal loan. This was older. This was something he'd set up long before he ever asked me for money directly, like he'd already built himself a backup plan that didn't require my permission at all. I went through the draw history next. $340,000, drawn down in 6 increments over the past year. I cross-referenced the dates against what I already knew about the company. The missed subcontractor payments, the bonus disbursement, a truck purchase Cole had posted about on Facebook back in the spring, grinning next to a new box truck with the company logo freshly wrapped on the side. The math didn't work. Not even close. $140,000 of those draws had no corresponding business expense I could find anywhere and the records were not a cent. It hadn't gone to payroll. It hadn't gone to suppliers. It had gone somewhere I couldn't see yet. I called Barbara that afternoon, careful with my questions, the way you have to be with her, because she still can't hear a hard truth about Cole without turning it into a referendum on whether I love him enough. Has Cole mentioned anything about a new bank? A new loan sometime last year. She hesitated. Barbara's hesitations always mean something. He mentioned he was restructuring some things around the time Denise left him. Why? I hadn't thought about Denise in months. Cole's ex-fiancée, who'd walked out on their engagement 14 months ago, almost exactly 14 months ago, though I hadn't put the timeline together until Barbara said it out loud. I sat with that for a long moment after I hung up. A new loan opened the same month his engagement collapsed. $140,000 I couldn't trace. A signature that was almost mine. Whatever my brother had done, I no longer believed it was only about the business. Cole finally called me back 4 days after I'd started leaving messages. Not to apologize, not to explain, to ask, in a voice that had gone hard and cornered, whether I'd been talking to Renata behind his back. She's the auditor investigating your company, Cole. She called me. Because my name is on a loan I never signed for. You don't understand the position I'm in, he said. If this audit finds problems, I lose everything. The company, the house, all of it. I need you to not make this worse. I'm not the one who forged my signature. The silence on the line lasted long enough that I actually checked to see if the call had dropped. Nobody forged anything, he finally said. I had power of attorney documentation from years ago, from when you were traveling for that client audit and asked me to handle some things while you were out of the country. I used that. I remembered the trip. 8 years old at this point, a 3-week engagement in Frankfurt, and yes, I had signed a limited power of attorney, so Cole could deal with a minor issue at our mother's house while I was unreachable. It had a scope. It had an expiration date written directly into the document. 90 days. That expired years ago, Cole. You know that. You were standing next to me when I signed it. It's a technicality. There it was again. That word. The same word he'd used about the bonus, about the subcontractors, about anything that required him to be accountable for a choice rather than a circumstance. I understood, hearing it a second time, that technicality wasn't a legal argument to him. It was a shield he reached for automatically, the way some people reach for an apology they don't mean. I told him I needed to think, and I hung up before he could talk me into anything. What I didn't tell him, what I decided not to tell him, was that I'd already begun documenting everything. Every call timestamped. Every text screenshotted. The expired power of attorney, saved and dated. I am, by training and temperament, a person who builds a file before I decide what the file is for. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with any of it. I only knew I wasn't going to walk into whatever came next unprepared, the way I had walked into every previous conversation with my brother, believing the best version of him was still the true one. 3 days later, Barbara called me in tears. Cole had gone to her, not to me, and told her a version of events where I was the villain of the story. That I was threatening to sink the company out of spite over a business disagreement. That I'd always resented his success. That I was the reason, if the company failed, families would lose their livelihoods. He said, "You're refusing to help him fix this," she said. Dana, is that true? Can't you just talk to the auditor, explain it was a misunderstanding? I sat with the phone against my ear, watching Ethan do his homework at the counter, and felt something in me go very still and very cold. My brother hadn't just used my name on a document without my permission. He'd gotten ahead of me with our mother, reframing what he'd done into something I was doing to him. Mom, he forged my signature on a $340,000 loan. I have the document. I have the expired power of attorney he's trying to use to justify it. This isn't a misunderstanding. Barbara went quiet in a different way this time. Not defensive, but uncertain, like the ground under her had shifted slightly. He didn't tell me it was that much. No, I said. I imagine he didn't. That night, I got an email from Renata Ibarra with a subject line that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Update. Additional signatory discrepancies identified. I opened Renata's email standing in my kitchen, still in my coat, and read it twice before I understood what I was looking at. In the course of reviewing the line of credit and 2 related vendor accounts, her office had identified a second signature pattern inconsistent with the account holder of record, this time on a business checking account belonging to Whitfield Restoration and Design itself. Not mine. Barbara's. I called Renata immediately. She was careful with her words, the way professionals are when they know something is about to detonate a family and they didn't light the fuse. I can't tell you everything since you're a third party to that particular account. But I can tell you this, your mother is listed as a secondary signer on the company's operating account, dated back to when the business was founded, for emergency purposes only. There have been 6 transfers out of that account in the last 10 months, each under $3,000, each using an authorization code tied to her signer profile. Staying under $3,000. I didn't need her to spell out why that mattered. I do this for a living. I know exactly what number makes certain bank reporting triggers less likely to fire. My brother hadn't made a mistake. He'd been careful. Methodical. He'd learned somewhere exactly how to stay small enough to avoid notice. I drove to Barbara's that same evening. She let me in still wearing her reading glasses, a crossword half finished on the kitchen table, and I felt a wave of something like grief before I'd even said a word, because I already knew she had no idea what I was about to show her. I laid it out as gently as I could. The account. The 6 transfers. Her name on all of them. She went white. I never authorized any transfers. I don't even remember the last time I used my card on that account. Cole set it up years ago in case I ever needed to cover something for him in an emergency, and I never touched it. Do you still have your card for that account? She went to her purse, dug through it, and came back holding a debit card I didn't recognize. Company logo, her name embossed across the bottom. She turned it over in her hands like she was seeing it for the first time. He asked me for this back in the spring, she said slowly, piecing it together as she spoke. Said the bank needed to reissue it because of some security update. I gave it to him. He said he'd mail me the new one. Her voice thinned out. He never did. I forgot to even ask again. There it was. My brother hadn't just forged a power of attorney on an 8-year-old document. He'd taken our mother's card under a lie and used her signer authority to move money out of an account she didn't even remember she had access to. I sat with her at that kitchen table for a long time. She cried, not loudly, just steadily. The particular grief of a mother realizing her child has been using her, not asking her, that there's a difference, and that difference changes everything about what kind of person he'd become. Why, she finally asked, would he need to hide it from both of us? If he needed money, he could have just asked me directly. I'd been turning that question over myself, and I finally understood the shape of the answer. Because he already asked me directly, Mom. I said no. And instead of accepting that, he built a way around it, using your name and mine, without either of us knowing, so it would never actually be a question he had to ask. Sitting there, looking at that debit card in her trembling hands, I finally understood what Renata's forensic trail was really showing me. This wasn't a company in financial trouble making a desperate mistake. This was a pattern. Deliberate, incremental, engineered specifically to stay below the threshold where either of us would notice, using 2 women who loved him and trusted him not to check. 14 months of small, careful decisions. All of them designed around one bet, that neither his sister nor his mother would ever look closely enough to catch him. He'd been wrong about one of us. He just didn't know it yet. Mine wasn't the only name on the file. I didn't sleep at Barbara's that night, but I stayed until nearly 11, walking her through what came next in the calm, methodical voice I use with clients when I have to tell them something is worse than they hoped but not beyond repair. I've built my career on staying steady when other people's finances are falling apart around them. I never had to do it for my own family before. I need you to do something hard, I told her. I need you to not warn him. She flinched at that. He's still my son, Dana. I know. And I'm not asking you to stop loving him. I'm asking you to let this happen the way it's supposed to happen, instead of the way he wants it to happen. I took her hand. If you call him tonight and tell him what we found, he'll have time to build another story. He's good at that. You've seen it. I've seen it. Let's not give him the chance. She agreed, reluctantly, and I drove home with a plan taking shape in my head that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with precision. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not a family friend, not someone who'd feel obligated to soften things for Cole's sake, but a forensic fraud attorney named Priya Anand, whom I'd worked alongside years earlier on a case involving a client's embezzling business partner. I laid out everything: the forged guarantee, the expired power of attorney Cole was trying to stretch to cover it, the 6 transfers from Barbara's signer account, the 14-month timeline that started the same month his engagement ended. Priya was quiet for a moment after I finished. You understand this is no longer just a family disagreement. What you're describing is loan fraud and likely elder financial exploitation, depending on how a prosecutor wants to characterize the account activity involving your mother. I did understand. I'd understood it for days, honestly, even before I let myself say the word out loud. I just hadn't been ready to hear someone else say it back to me in a way that made it real. I don't want him in prison, I told her, and I meant it even now. I want the false guarantee removed from my name. I want my mother made whole. And I want him to face actual consequences instead of talking his way past this the way he's talked his way past everything else his whole life. Those aren't contradictory goals, Priya said. But you need to move carefully, and you need to let the documentation speak instead of you. Everything you've built already, keep building it. Don't confront him again outside of a controlled setting. Every phone call you've had with him so far, did you save? I had. Every one timestamped, some even recorded through my banking app's call log, though I'd need to check what was admissible. I'd been building a file since the first night, without fully admitting to myself that I was building a case. We spent 2 hours going through the timeline together. Priya drafted a formal notice to the bank disputing the guarantee as fraudulent, supported by the expired power of attorney and a signature analysis she recommended I have done professionally rather than relying on my own read of it. She also drafted correspondence to Renata Ibarra's office, formally putting the forensic auditor on notice that both the guarantee and the account transfers involving Barbara were part of the same pattern and should be reviewed together, not separately. He doesn't know you've done any of this, Priya said, near the end. That's your advantage right now. He thinks he's managing his sister and his mother. He doesn't know he's about to be managed by an actual investigation. That night, Cole texted me. Can we talk? I feel like this has gotten out of hand and I don't want to lose you over it. 6 months ago, that message would have undone me. I would have called him within the hour, softened. Found some way to meet him halfway because that's what I'd always done. Protected him from the consequences of being exactly who he was. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I set the phone down without answering and opened my laptop instead and kept working through the file Priya and I had started building. Every date lined up, every dollar traced, every piece of evidence in its place, waiting for the moment it would matter most. He thought he had nowhere to go but through me. He had no idea I was no longer standing where he left me. The confrontation didn't happen the way I expected. I'd pictured something loud, a family dinner gone wrong, raised voices in Barbara's kitchen. Instead, it happened in a conference room on the 9th floor of a downtown office building on a Thursday morning, with Cole sitting across a table from me for the first time in weeks, flanked by his own attorney. Because Priya's notice to the bank had triggered exactly the kind of formal response she'd predicted it would. Renata Ibarra was there too, seated slightly apart, her forensic report open in front of her like a hand she hadn't shown yet. Cole looked older than I remembered from Ethan's birthday party in June. Tired in a way that made something in me ache despite everything, because some part of me will probably always be the girl who packed his lunches. I let that part of me feel what it felt, and then I let the rest of me do what needed doing. His attorney opened by trying to frame the guarantee as a documentation oversight, the same word Cole had used on the phone, dressed up in a suit. Priya let him finish, unhurried, and then slid a folder across the table. "This is the original power of attorney your client is relying on," she said. "You'll note the expiration clause on page 2, in bold, 90 days from execution. That document expired over 7 years before the loan guarantee was signed. I'd also direct your attention to the signature comparison from an independent forensic document examiner, which found a 94% probability of non-matching signatures between my client's known signature and the one on the loan guarantee." Cole's attorney glanced at him. Cole didn't look at either of them. He was looking at me. "Dana," he said low, like it might still just be the two of us in the room. "I was trying to save the company. I was going to pay it back before you even noticed." "I did notice," I said. "An auditor noticed. Not you telling me. Not you asking me. You spent 14 months making sure I wouldn't have to know." Renata spoke next, and her voice, flat and procedural, did more damage to him than anything Priya or I had said. "I want to note for the record that the guarantee is only one part of what my review identified. There's also a pattern of transfers from a business account using an authorized signer profile belonging to Barbara Whitfield, totaling approximately $18,000 over 10 months, each structured under a threshold that would typically avoid additional bank reporting." She looked at Cole directly for the first time. "I'll be including both findings in my report to the creditor group and, per my engagement terms, I'm obligated to flag the pattern involving an elderly family member's account to the appropriate regulatory contact." I watched something leave my brother's face in that moment. Not anger, which I'd braced for, but something closer to the specific fear of a person who has just understood that the story he'd been telling himself, the one where this was all still manageable, still fixable with enough charm and enough time, had run out of road. "Mom doesn't want this to go anywhere," he said, quieter now. "She'd never want this to go anywhere." "Mom found out you took her card under a lie," I said. "Mom found out you let her believe, for 10 months, that it was sitting safely in a drawer. You don't get to decide what she wants anymore, Cole. Not about this." His attorney tried once more, offering to negotiate a repayment structure directly with me, off the record, to keep this contained. Priya answered before I had to. "My client is willing to discuss a resolution regarding the guarantee removal and restitution to Mrs. Whitfield. She is not willing to discuss making this quietly disappear. The forensic findings exist independent of anything my client does next." Cole finally looked away from me, down at the folder in front of him, and for a long moment nobody spoke. I thought about the boy who used to give me his dessert, and I let myself grieve him one more time, fully in that silence, because I understood I was about to close a door I had kept open for 38 years out of love, and grief and love aren't so different when something ends. "What do you want?" he finally asked. Not defiant. Just tired. "I want my name off that guarantee formally in writing this week. I want Mom repaid in full with an accounting for every transfer. And I want you to tell her yourself, not through me, not through an excuse, exactly what you did and why." He nodded once, and I watched my brother, for the first time in longer than I could remember, stop reaching for a technicality. It took 6 weeks to unwind everything properly, which surprised me. I'd expected either a swift collapse or an endless fight, and instead got the slow, unglamorous work of actual accountability, which turns out to look a lot like paperwork. The bank accepted the forensic signature analysis and the expired power of attorney as grounds to void the guarantee. My name came off the $340,000 line of credit within 11 days of Priya filing the formal dispute. I remember the email confirming it landing in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon, almost the same hour, almost the exact week as the original call from Renata had come in, and I sat there for a minute just breathing, feeling something in my chest unclenched that I hadn't fully realized was still clenched. Barbara's restitution took longer, tangled up with the broader creditor proceedings against the company. But Cole paid her back in full by early October in 3 installments, the last one arriving with a note that just said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I mean it this time." Barbara showed it to me without comment. I didn't say what I thought, which was that this time was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and that I hoped, for her sake more than his, it turned out to be true. The company didn't survive. Renata's full report, combined with the existing creditor lawsuit, was enough to push Whitfield Restoration and Design into an orderly wind-down rather than a continued fight to save it. Cole lost the business he'd built at 23, the one I'd helped him start at my kitchen table half a lifetime ago. I won't pretend that didn't hurt to watch. But I also won't pretend it wasn't the direct, traceable result of choices he made and kept making, long after there were easier, honest paths available to him. He sat down with Barbara alone, the week after the confrontation in that conference room, and told her everything, the card, the transfers, the reasoning he'd told himself made it acceptable. She called me that night, quieter than I'd heard her in months, and said, he finally sounded like he was actually listening to himself say it out loud. I think that was the beginning of something real for him, though I've learned not to measure my brother's growth in weeks. Cole and I are not close anymore, not the way we were. We talk sometimes, birthdays, holidays that Barbara insists on, the occasional dry, careful text. He got a job managing projects for another contractor in Dayton, starting over in a role with far less authority and far more oversight than he's used to, which I suspect is exactly what he needs right now, whether he'd admit that or not. I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we were. I've made a kind of peace with that. Some relationships change shape permanently once you've had to protect yourself from the person inside them, and pretending otherwise would just be another kind of lie, and I'm done with those, even the comfortable ones. What I did get back, clearly and completely, was myself. For years I measured my worth in that family by what I was willing to absorb quietly. A loan, a doubt, a bonus I found out about by accident and chose not to make a scene over. I used to think that made me strong. I understand now it mostly just made me available. Ethan started his senior year 3 weeks ago. We sat down together and went through college financing without a single conversation about whether we could actually afford it, because we can. Because I didn't lose my house to a signature I never made. Mark asked me, one night not long after the guarantee finally came off, whether I regretted any of it, the file I built, the lawyer, the auditor's report that ended a business my brother had poured a decade into. I told him no. I regretted, if anything, waiting so long to trust what I already knew instead of the version of Cole I wanted to still be true. I didn't set out to destroy anything. I set out to stop absorbing what wasn't mine to carry, and to make sure the truth, once I found it, didn't stay buried under someone else's convenience. It turned out that was enough. It turned out that was everything. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's another one waiting next week, and I think you'll want to hear how it ends too.